A car chase through a Chicago neighborhood ended in a crash. ICE agents say the driver was an illegal immigrant.
4 o'clock in the morning, Chicago freezing cold and pitch black. 1,600 federal agents launch simultaneously, 20 locations, 800 targets all at once. This isn't an ordinary street gang, it's the most brutal paramilitary organization from Mexico that quietly turned Chicago into the logistics hub of their criminal empire war rifles, smuggled overseas fentanyl, killing thousands of Americans, pouring into the Midwest on the very freight trains you see every day. Operation Steel Flood, the largest cartel raid in the city's history, is about to explode. The next 3 hours will keep you glued to the screen. 4 o'clock in the morning in Chicago, 1,600 federal agents, 20 locations, 800 targets. Let's watch how they do it. The largest cartel raid in the city's history is about to begin. 1,600 federal agents have flooded into Chicago for Operation Steel Flood, dismantling the fortified stronghold of the organized crime group Lozetta in the most dangerous raid this city has ever seen. Chicago is a city built on movement. The rail lines, warehouse districts, and endless streams of freight keep the entire Midwest alive. But beneath that constant motion, federal agents sense something taking shape, something organized, something dangerous. The Lozetta group had infiltrated Chicago the same way they expanded across Mexico silently, with military precision. They are not a street gang fighting over corners. They are a paramilitary organization formed from former elite soldiers infamous for their brutality and iron discipline. The FBI has classified them as a national security threat, not merely a drug cartel. Their operations in Chicago are seamlessly woven into the city's logistics network. Heavy weapons move through cargo ports, then resurface in foreign conflict zones. Money is laundered through trucking companies, and drugs, unusually pure methamphetamine, heroin, and massive shipments of fentanyl flow through industrial corridors into the Midwest. For months, investigators only saw scattered fragments, odd containers, encrypted conversations, sudden bursts of violence near abandoned lots, but no clear target. Then a confidential informant emerged. A confidential source reported a shipment of military-grade rifles moving through a warehouse on the city's south side. Not handguns, but weapons built for war. When the intel reached ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Division, the atmosphere in the Chicago field office shifted instantly. Senior agents recognized the pattern at once. Military-grade rifles, cartel-level drugs, and clandestine warehousing could only mean one thing: the Lozetta group had sunk roots far deeper than anyone had imagined. But ICE couldn't handle it alone. Within days, the case was escalated to a joint interagency task force. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force came in first, not because of the drugs, but because Lozetta operated with insurgency-style tactics, multi-layered command structure, encrypted couriers, and violence designed to terrorize entire neighborhoods. ATF followed, bringing expertise in tracing weapons that vanished into international conflicts. The Chicago Police Department's Gang Intelligence Unit added street-level knowledge, the blocks, the safe houses, the quiet territorial shifts that federal databases never see. Over 3 years, the investigation spread like a shadow map beneath the city, with surveillance teams rotating through rail yards and transportation hubs. Undercover agents infiltrated repair shops and warehouses suspected of holding Lozetta shipments. Wiretaps picked up coded phrases like long tools, cold engines, and night packages, later decoded as rifles, drug loads, and cash. ATF ballistics experts confirmed the worst some of the rifles recovered in foreign conflict zones had originated from purchases in Illinois, run through straw buyers, then delivered to Lozetta. DEA chemists analyzed drugs seized from routine traffic stops across the state. The purity was unmistakable. This was Lozetta-grade meth produced in industrial super labs. Each piece tightened the noose. What began with a single informant had become a full portrait of a cartel that had built a logistics hub inside Chicago's labyrinth of warehouses. And by late 2024, federal prosecutors agreed the evidence was strong enough to greenlight an unprecedented takedown. By winter 2024, every agency involved knew exactly what they were up against. Lozetta hadn't just carved out a foothold in Chicago, they had built a fully operational hub, fortified warehouses, armed sentries, and a delivery network trained in counter-surveillance. Federal prosecutors made the call it was time to move. The operation was named Steel Flood, a reference to the wave of federal agents that would hit just before dawn. In a heavily secured command center on the city's west side, leaders from ICE, FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, Illinois State Police, and CPD poured over a digital map dotted with red markers. Each marker represented a Lozetta-linked site weapons caches, drug processing labs, stash houses, and 2 warehouses identified as potential command hubs. "800 targets, in all 1,600 officers assigned to the strike, a scale rivaling some of the largest federal operations in American history. At 4:42 a.m., the first teams rolled out. Armored vehicles headed south on still empty expressways. Helicopters hovered silently above the industrial corridors. Sniper teams took positions on rooftops near the southern rail yards. Chicago was still, dark, cold, and quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before everything explodes. The breach began at 4:58 a.m. at Warehouse 17, deep inside the sprawling Windstorm Freight Complex. The SWAT stack approached the reinforced steel door. Before the breacher could even swing the ram, the first muzzle flash lit up from inside.
Fire on the hole.
The defenders fired first. The sound cracked across the empty lot, short, controlled bursts, not the wild spray of street gangs. These were trained shooters. Federal agents dropped flat. Snipers on the adjacent rooftop identified 2 gunmen behind stacked pallets. 2 precise shots ended the threat. Flashbangs detonated. The steel door crashed inward. Agents poured in, voices booming commands through the ringing echo. They found 3 Lozetta members barricaded behind forklifts, still fighting until the sheer volume of agents flooding the building overwhelmed them. At that same moment across the city, identical scenes unfolded. At a warehouse near Cicero Avenue, a team pinned down an armed security detail trying to flee in 2 pickup trucks. The vehicles were boxed in by armored units before they could even fire. At a row house in South Chicago, agents faced a sandbagged strongpoint, but the suspects surrendered the moment the breaching charge blew. By 7:10 a.m., the operation hit its peak. Hundreds in custody, weapons everywhere. Drugs stacked in industrial packaging, ledgers, money counters, encrypted phones, logistics notebooks, and most critically, ironclad proof that Chicago had become the distribution nerve center for the Lozetta network. The city had just witnessed the largest cartel takedown in its history. As the dust settled from the early morning raids, federal agents shifted to Phase 2 of Operation Steel Flood, turning chaos into evidence. Every warehouse, every container, every phone, every spent round was now a piece of the massive criminal map prosecutors had waited years to complete. Inside Warehouse 17, the site of the first shots fired, agents worked methodically. The air still reeked of gunpowder shell casings, neatly marked with little yellow triangles. The bullet-riddled forklift was cordoned off as evidence. Beneath a false wall of pallets, investigators uncovered a cache of military-wrapped rifles, each one with its serial number professionally obliterated. ATF ballistics experts immediately recognized the rifle pattern, the same make previously traced to foreign conflict zones. This was the first direct proof that Chicago wasn't just a distribution hub, it was a weapons pipeline. At another Southern target, agents uncovered a fortified room that looked more like a forward operating base than a gang hideout. Freight route maps were pinned across corkboards. Colored strings linked Texas ports to Illinois rail hubs. Encrypted tablets lay scattered on a steel table, still logged into a messaging channel displaying the Lozetta emblem. The room felt less like a criminal den and more like an outpost. Can you even imagine it right beneath the freight trains you see rumbling through Chicago every single day? Tons of fentanyl and war-grade rifles were quietly flowing into the Midwest, and nobody had a clue. Meanwhile, at a house on Ashland Avenue, a secondary standoff unfolded. The U.S. Marshals team breached a two-story residence believed to be a cash and drug stash house. As they entered, a mid-level Lozetta commander tried to flee down the back stairs, firing wildly down the hallway. A deputy marshal returned 2 controlled shots, wounding him in the leg. The rest surrendered instantly. On the second floor, agents found steel drums packed with rubber-banded cash and spiral notebooks, torn open to pages detailing payouts, bribes, and shipping schedules. Each piece exposed the full organizational structure, a 3-tier military-style hierarchy: weapons handlers, logistics teams embedded in trucking companies, a financial wing laundering money through commodity brokers, and a Chicago plaza boss who reported directly to Mexico. Federal prosecutors spent hours stitching every detail together. ATF matched dozens of rifles to overseas seizures. DEA confirmed the meth seized in Chicago came from a single network of super labs across the border. FBI analysts decrypted conversations outlining plans to expand distribution from Illinois into Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Ohio. By the end of the weekend, the evidence filled an entire federal warehouse. The charges were staggering: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, international weapons, trafficking money, laundering violent crimes in aid of racketeering, and providing material support to a criminal enterprise. Some defendants faced mandatory minimums. Others, especially those tied to the weapons pipeline, were staring at life sentences. What began as scattered fragments of intelligence had become an ironclad case strong enough to dismantle a paramilitary cartel operating in the heart of one of America's biggest cities. Chicago had seen the battle. Now the city would watch the fallout. In the hours after Operation Steel Flood, Chicago slipped into a strange silence. The kind that blankets a city after a storm nobody realized was raging until it finally passed. Police radios crackled non-stop. Federal convoys rolled through the industrial corridors. Helicopters traced slow circles over the south sky. But for the first time in years, every movement was controlled, orderly, no longer dictated by Lozetta. The operation, however, was far from over. Inside the command center, agents watched heat signatures and drone footage from the remaining target zones. Not every Lozetta member had been caught in the initial wave. Some had melted into alleys and abandoned lots the moment the first door came down. Others were already trying to regroup, the same playbook they had used in Mexico. They looked for high ground, rooftops, vantage points, anywhere to counterattack or slip away. One such standoff erupted near the old grain silos along the Calumet River. An ICE ATF quick reaction team spotted movement inside the upper floors of the abandoned plant. Thermal imaging showed 2 armed suspects hunkered behind rusted machinery. As the team moved in, the suspects opened fire from above, rounds sparking off steel beams. Agents used the concrete silos as cover and returned steady fire. The gunfight lasted less than 40 seconds but was vicious, a sharp reminder that Lozetta didn't do surrender. Once the suspects were down, the final sweep began. Federal agents spent the next 48 hours cataloging what was left: hidden basement labs, vacuum-sealed fentanyl bricks, stamped with Lozetta markings, lockers full of rifle parts, and tactical gear ledgers, listing payoffs to drivers across 5 states. Chicago's leadership held a joint press conference at City Hall. They stood shoulder to shoulder, federal, state, and local, and made it clear this wasn't just a victory. It was a warning. Lozetta had tried to plant a military-style stronghold inside America's biggest logistics capital and had come terrifyingly close. In the hardest-hit neighborhoods, residents stepped outside and watched the convoys disappear down streets that had once been ruled by fear. Many had lived for years with the sound of unmarked vans at midnight coded handoffs near the loading docks, the unspoken knowledge that certain blocks no longer belonged to the city. Now, for the first time, there was a cautious feeling that control was being clawed back. But nobody celebrated because Chicago knows what the federal commanders know: removing hundreds of Lozetta members created a power vacuum. Power vacuums attract new predators. Smaller crews could rise. Other international cartels could move to reclaim the lost territory. Federal agencies pledged a long-term presence, sustained intelligence teams and patrol units backing CPD. Community groups stepped up too. Youth programs re-entry support real jobs efforts to keep vulnerable kids from becoming the next cartel recruiting class. In the end, Operation Steel Flood didn't just dismantle a cartel network, it exposed how close Chicago had come to becoming a permanent node in an international paramilitary empire. The battle happened. The city endured. What comes next will decide whether the victory lasts. In the end, Operation Steel Flood wasn't just a raid, it was a lesson. A reminder that even in America's biggest, fastest-moving city, danger can grow quietly in the shadows of the very systems we all depend on. Operation Steel Flood was one of the most impressive interagency collaborations in recent American history. More than 1,600 agents from HSI, FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, Illinois State Police, and CPD simultaneously raided 20 locations, arresting hundreds of heavy hitters and seizing tons of fentanyl and military-grade weapons. The operation exposed the dangerous depth of paramilitary cartel penetration into the nation's logistics center. The streets are safer. The message is clear, but a power vacuum remains. Victory can only be sustained with community support, youth programs, and long-term federal-local cooperation. Chicago won the big battle. Now it must win the peace. The lesson from Chicago. The greatest danger isn't gunfire in the streets, it's the silence while a cartel quietly hijacks the very rails, highways, and warehouses the entire country depends on to build a criminal empire. They don't need to take blocks with open warfare. A few unnoticed containers are enough. Every time you see a freight train rolling or a convoy of trucks moving in perfect rhythm, remember in the shadows of that flow, predators are always watching. Only the vigilance of every single citizen and the iron coordination between agencies can stop the next steel flood. This isn't just the job of the police. This is the job of all of us. Operation Steel Flood is over hundreds of Mexican paramilitary gunmen in custody, tons of fentanyl and war-grade rifles seized. But Chicago is holding its breath over the power vacuum. When one monster falls, others are already circling to take its place. Is this the final victory or just the calm before the next storm? What do you think? Drop Steel Flood in the comments if you believe the city is changed forever, or vacuum if another cartel will move in soon. Your single comment decides whether this video reaches millions more. Thank you for watching to the very end.